close the door gently on the day. Let the room grow smaller, kinder. Imagine a slow breath, then another, like the Thames turning over in its sleep. Tonight, we walk into a city that never quite learned to whisper. London, when plays were new and pockets were nervous, when the orchestra was a cough and the interval was an argument between vinegar and ale. If the world outside still has sharp edges, let this one be soft. A lantern carried through fog, a seat found among strangers who will soon be friends, a story that knows how to dim itself. If this little journey brings a pocket of calm, leave a quiet sign on the door before drifting off. Tap like, subscribe for the next gentle ramble, and in the comments, write the time and the city listening with us. For example, CEST, 1840, Milan. It draws a sleepy map of company, a constellation of windows, a choir of bedside clocks that hum the same note. Begin with cobbles shining like careful thoughts. The street vendors are already warming the evening with onions and opinions. Somewhere a hawker sings a list of oranges as if he wrote them himself. Somewhere else, a pickpocket rehearses honesty and forgets it. Across the river, the theaters lean together like conspirators. They have learned the trick of building laughter where officials file complaints. A bell tests its voice. Someone clears a throat, and the town answers with 1,000 smaller versions of the same sound, as if lungs had joined the cast. Step closer, past the paper promises nailed to posts, past the boy who swears he saw a ghost and is willing to sell directions. The groundlings press like tide water against a stage bright with daylight and wagers. The cheap place is the honest place. Here, applause is a coin with no counterfeit. Here, ale is a critic who prefers second acts. In the galleries, sleeves pretend to be manners. Below, elbows perform their own play, a comedy in 3 jostles. Sneezing is a percussion section, coughing the bass line. No one minds, everyone belongs. London breathes in chapters. Today's is a chapter about gathering. Feet learning the same corner by habit. Hands remembering where to rest. Eyes deciding to forgive the weather. A vendor whispers that oysters are luck. A mother insists that handkerchiefs are better. Someone sells a miracle folded into paper. It turns out to be roasted peas and good timing. The river keeps score of everything and judges nothing. Barges move like slow punctuation. Bridges collect footsteps as if they were rent. There are watchers who disapprove of joy measured in laughter. They fold their arms like shutters and declare theater a draft. But even stern windows must blink, and even narrow streets cannot refuse a story that fits. When closures come, the doors learn to be patient. When they open, dust rises like applause that waited too long and forgives immediately. Between shut and open, actors remember fields and fields remember lines. A city survives by practicing entrances. If calm has begun to find its chair, let it settle. Shoulders can set down the day the way a porter sets down a trunk. close to the bed, handle turned toward morning. Breathe as if the night were warm bread, and the room knew the recipe. With each exhale, trade a worry for a quieter thing. The scratch of quill on paper, the hush of a curtain learning where to fall, the polite tap of rain on a sign that advertises a comedy and delivers a kindness. This is not a history that requires bracing. It is a walk taken slowly enough to keep company with the small details. The way a candle hums when a door opens. The way a cloak, once wet, remembers to be heavier later. The way a joke told to a stranger moves into the neighborhood of friendship without asking rent. If sleep arrives, let it. The story will tuck itself in and keep a place for tomorrow. If the mind wishes to wander, give it a handkerchief and point it toward the bridge. In a moment, the first scene will lift its head. The crowd will become a single animal, gentle and curious. A purse will decide whether to be careful. A throat will consider clearing itself, and for once decline. Until then, rest between heartbeat and footstep. And if this lantern of a channel has lit the edge of the night, leave a small spark behind. Like, subscribe, and write the time and city that shared the room. It is how strangers become neighbors in the comments, how evenings discover their echoes across oceans. Now, breathe the stage into focus. The boards are warm with stories that refuse to stay on paper. The first line is standing on tiptoe. The city leans in. Sleep, if it wants, may take the best seat.
The street learns the day before the sky does. Lanterns still make small arguments with the fog when the fishmonger rehearses his list like a prayer he's finally learned to enjoy. Oysters have opinions. So do onions. So does the river, which never stops narrating, even when no one's listening. The bridge yawns and counts feet. The bell in the distance warms its throat and decides to let the sun go first. Follow the elbows. That's the rule most mornings. They know the way to bread, to rumor, to the corner where the boy with ink on his fingers posts a new playbill that looks suspiciously like last week's, plus a murder. A man coughs into his hat. Another coughs into the air. A third sells oranges to both. This is London's music before breakfast. Throat clearing and tin, cartwheels and a priest pretending not to buy gingerbread. Across the water, the theaters sit where the city keeps its contradictions. Merriment beside sermons, sausage beside sin, laughter beside law. The timber circles wake with the tide, shutters blinking, flags thinking about wind. Groundlings will gather where the floor remembers their names, and the galleries will remember which sleeves paid extra to be seen paying extra. Everyone will begin with the same cough and end with the same story, told back at different tables. By noon, the street learns new verbs. Hawkers perform their inventories. Hot pies, hotter judgment. Sugared nuts, unsugared truths. A tankard with more faith than hops. Pickpockets, foists with clean fingers and nips who trust the blade more than luck arrive as shadows and become men when coins change their minds. Their craft is a kind of schooling, so the pamphlets say, with pockets hung like bells in certain back rooms, lessons in how to take a counter without making a hymn of it. Territory is a map only they can see, and theater day draws borders out of breath. If the crowd needs concentrating, a ballad will do. If the crowd needs tilting, a man climbing a steeple will tilt it kindly. Either way, purses learn to be elsewhere. If a cut purse is caught, the stage is a pillory that can act. He'll be tied to a post while the play rehearses justice around him and the audience practices mercy by laughing. Inside, daylight does not argue. It pours. The stage boards remember feet. The players mouth the line to check if it still knows them, and relief passes between their faces like a loaf at a hungry table. The ground quivers with the arrival of groundlings, a soft tide of ale and opinions. Jokes fall like early pears, some bruise, some are perfect. Someone sneezes at the exact wrong moment and invents a new exit. A child stands on his own toes to see a king wearing secondhand velvet and recognizes an uncle. There is a rumor of plague tangled in the rushes, as there always is when the city counts itself too sharply. Bills are read in the morning like weather and worry. If the number rises, doors will learn to be stern. If the number falls, shutters will practice fluttering without guilt. No one says it aloud inside the yard. Instead, they clear their throats with purpose, the universal spell against what cannot be seen. Vinegar cloth is tucked into sleeves like talismans, oranges halved like small suns to hold under the nose. Remedies are as much theater as theater is remedy, and both are accepted at the usual price. A laugh travels up to the galleries and down again, changed, as if the air had counseled it to be kinder. Lovers in the second tier remember to look surprised. A constable in the third tier remembers not to. The playwright has hidden a line where the Lord Mayor likes to sit, a compliment disguised as civic concern in case a closure is thinking of arriving early. The bear garden next door clears its own throat, and the chorus adjusts, building its music around the growl. The river, as ever, provides the bass. When the first act breaks, the yard becomes a market with one admission. A woman sells pies with a shrug that means the meat remembers yesterday. A man sells ballads that forget the tune on purpose so people will teach it back to him. A foist watches which pocket receives which coin when the paper changes hands. He will tell the story later with his fingers. Two apprentices rehearse a duel with ladles, the only honorable weapon at their pay. A clerk from the Inns of Court swears he's only here for language. Language swears it's only here for him. A cough begins in the West Gallery and heads east like weather. People give it room, the way they give room to a lady's skirt or a dog with a bone. Polite, performative, hopeful. The players carry on as if breath were a kind of stage property. Heavy, fragile, shared. Someone calls God bless and means it. Someone else calls beer and means that too. Above the stage, a scrap of cloud admits it would like to rain and then thinks better of it for the sake of an entrance later. By the time the villain explains himself, daylight has become good light, the kind that forgives faces and lies equally. A purse discovers that it was not in fact safest where its owner swore it would be. The owner remembers the sermon about vanity and decides that a lesson has been purchased. At the back, a boy with the voice of a bell sells slices of apple that taste like virtue. He will become an actor by accident next winter when a throat refuses its duties. The rope ladder up to the tiring house creaks like gossip. Backstage, a borrowed cloak warms a man who will die of a fever this year that is not the famous one. His friend ties the clasp tighter without remark, which is how love looks when it knows where it lives. When the final applause lifts, even the sternest sleeves consent to be hands. Hats perform their small rise and fall ballet. The stage bows like a bridge. The tied cut purse, if today was his day, has learned the difference between audience and crowd. A constable unties him slowly enough to be just and quick enough to be alive afterward. A vendor counts the shells that used to be oysters and decides that luck is a tide you can meet halfway. Outside, the city inhales after holding itself in place for 2 hours. The river answers with its old story, rewritten by light. News runs ahead toward supper. Closures are a rumor for tomorrow. Tonight, the lungs of London have chosen laughter and its cousin, the cough that clears room for it. The bridge receives the feet it had been expecting. The bell remembers its manners. On a corner near the sign with a painted bear, a boy we saw this morning holds a new paper under a new nail. The title promises a shipwreck and a wedding and a joke about lawyers. The paper flutters in the same way a curtain learns to. Above, a gull writes a rude word with its voice and is forgiven. Across the way, a door with a painted sun admits 3 actors and the smell of fennel. We, who followed the elbows, follow the scent. In another house, close enough to hear the theater breathe when it sleeps, a landlord practices the arithmetic of rent. Down the lane, in an upper room, a woman folds a handkerchief in a way that means she is thinking of leaving, then unfolds it in a way that means not yet. The city coughs softly, the way a body that is not ill still reminds itself that air is a thing one borrows. Tomorrow, someone will count. Tonight, we will count something kinder. The steps from stage to supper, the number of oranges that became suns, the moments when strangers made the same sound for different reasons and were therefore briefly kin. Sleep can come in on this tide if it wants. The second chapter begins where the first has left the door ajar, in the lane behind the playhouse, where a purse finds its way home, a line finds its way into a new mouth, and a closure decides to be late. The city will cough again. It will also laugh. Both are necessary. Both are honest.
The lane behind the playhouse is a lung that learns to breathe after applause. Steam lifts from pies like brief sermons. A fiddler rehearses a melody that can be bought for half a walnut and a promise to remember it wrong on purpose. Somewhere, a voice laughs without moving his mouth. Somewhere, a constable practices the walk that says, tomorrow, not today. The boards inside cool like a forehead after a good thought. Numbers arrive with the morning and stay all day, folded in pockets with onions and news. If the death bill ticks up, shutters grow thoughtful. If it rests, flags remember how to be flags. There are orders on the other side of the river, sermons with seals, that explain, in long sentences, why laughter is bad for lungs, why great multitudes of the basest sort must not gather to trade breath for stories, why alehouses are lectures that get out of hand after the first cup. There are letters from councils higher than councils that quietly permit merriment to breathe again, provided the Queen's taste is satisfied first. The city and the stage play tug-of-war with one rope and 3 sets of hands, and the knot never moves for long. In the yard, the cure for worry is choreography. Oranges are half like tiny suns and pressed under noses as if citrus could argue with fate. Vinegar cloths emerge from sleeves, the little altars people carry.
A superstition about rosemary makes the rounds and finds a seed in the galleries. A woman measures the wind with her veil. If it comes from the river, she sits nearer the stage, as if language blocks weather. Coughs are edited, discreet, turned downward, then increasingly theatrical as the ale revises courage. Actors pass a shared sprig from hand to hand backstage, a charm against silence. The property man swears the sprig is braver than the company. Groundlings arrange themselves by temperature, near the stage if the sun is shy, near the ale if the purse is, near the door if the conscience is. They tell the time by shadows and the quality of curses. Early curses are inventive. Late curses are economical. Apprentices hold a coin up to the light as if God might engrave a second one while looking. In the second tier, a merchant convinces himself that attending a comedy is an investment in foreign languages. He applauds on the offbeats and forgives himself. A boy repeats a speech he has never studied and gets most of it right, because hunger sharpens memory and the voice knows where it wants to land. Across the yard, fear and habit negotiate like old rivals who share a bench. A matron keeps her orange like a sacrament. Her neighbor keeps a laugh like a cough turned friendly. Someone swears a man has the plague because he looks dramatic. 5 heads turn and then remember that theater is full of men who look dramatic, and only half of them are dying. The bell in the parish beyond the wall practices a note and puts it away as if rehearsing pity. The bear garden clears his throat again, and a child imagines the bear is auditioning for the villain. The child is not wrong. Outside the walls, officials assemble sentences that begin with "for as much" and end with "upon pain," explaining that no more alehouses shall be licensed than strictly needed, that tippling is the swiftest road for a pestilence to learn everyone's address, that curfew is a cure written in bells. Inside, a player trims a speech by 2 breaths and saves a life in the 3rd. There is always an argument between law and stage about which is more instructive. Today, the stage wins because the weather is kind and the law has a meeting. When the heavens decide to rehearse rain, the galleries lean forward and become roofs with the Kenyans. The groundlings lilt together. An inch to the left is tradition, 2 inches is mutiny. A vendor with more rumor than pies shouts "hot" as if temperature were a recipe. A purse gives birth to a smaller purse that holds the last good coin. Both will go missing before sundown, and a sermon will be preached at them with surprising tenderness. A constable catches a nip by the sleeve and untangles a story in which nobody is guilty and everybody is busy. He postpones justice until the end of the jig, which is how civilization improves itself a little without boasting. A throat clears in the tiring house with the sound of a door deciding to be a window. The boy who will be a prince next week cannot find yesterday's voice. The stage keeper hands him a mug that has solved other problems and might solve this one too. A man with the look of winter on him coughs into a cloth that used to be a map. He cannot find his way home, but he finds the next line. They tell each other not to worry in the tense private grammar of friends. You are, we will, it did. Between acts, a broadside flutters like a new wing on the playhouse door. It lists closures from 2 summers ago and triumphs from last Michaelmas, and the names of 3 noble houses who loved the stage so much they adopt it whenever the city slaps his hand. It says the players will tour if they must, pray if they should, and practice if they can. It says the play comes in hot weather, and moralists come in all weathers. It says laughter spreads too, and nobody has written an order against that. By the final bow, the yard has decided to be a congregation. Hats rise like a field of small, relieved moons. A cough tries to lead the applause and fails, which is funny. It bows too. The lane outside breathes in to make room for the leaving. Numbers will be read again in the morning. Tonight, the ledger is simpler. How many oranges were saved for the walk home? How many lines found the person who needed them? How many pockets were lifted? And how many chins, too? The river takes the crowd with the tenderness of something that has fared worse. The flag tucks itself down with the authority of a mother. The bear, if he has worked today, sleeps without a speech. A boy in the lane behind recites to his own shadow until the words keep him company instead of needing his help. Tomorrow there may be a closure, or a letter that says there was and now isn't, or a sermon that folds his arms so hard it forgets they are arms. But tonight, the city finds the exact place between fear and habit where a story can lie down and still be heard. We leave the last of the ale on the windowsill to recommend the house to luck. We count the steps to the river as if they were a cure. In the morning, the playbills will wake early and the numbers will arrive late. And between the two, the theaters will hold their breath again, then laugh, then cough, then laugh. The third chapter is already waiting in the alley where the printers hang their damp pages like laundry, and a roomer tries on a new font to see if it fits.
By noon, the yard is already breathing in unison, a single creature made of elbows and steam. The flag above the playhouse tells a white lie, comedy, and the trumpet confirms it, though the crowd knows every story contains a little winter, and every laugh travels by way of a cough. The pit becomes a weather system, gusts of laughter, light drizzle of ale, a high-pressure ridge of rumor rolling in from the gate. A boy sells oranges like pocket-sized suns. A woman sells vinegar cloths with the gravity of a priest. No one admits fear aloud. They wear it as a habit and call it prudence. Groundlings arrange themselves by inclination and temperature. Closest to the stage stand those who prefer words to weather, pressed so near the boards that the splinters can eavesdrop. To the left collect the ale optimists, sure that courage is a liquid with a reliable recipe. To the right hover the quick-footed, pickpockets, yes, but also men who know when a sermon is walking toward them. Up in the galleries, a merchant explains to a companion that he attends for language, which is true enough. Language attends for him, too, and keeps a chair empty for his better self. The play begins the way bread breaks, suddenly, and with a sense that hands will be fed. Daylight pours down like rehearsal notes. The boards remember boots that are not here anymore and forgive the ones that are. A prince is announced with a trumpet that sounds like it learned music from a blacksmith. The pit leans forward, a tilted field of penny hope. A joke lands near the front and rolls backward through the yard like a coin seeking its purse. By the time it reaches the door, it has become local wisdom and will be quoted in a tavern with a new author by sunset. Elbows do the work of civil government. They delegate space, negotiate borders, apologize without speaking. Each apology buys a sip, each sip buys a cough, each cough buys a glance, and the glances add up to a ledger of who will be avoided at the next act break. The word vector has not arrived yet, but the city already knows the mathematics of breath, how laughter can braid strangers together, how ale can untie the knot, how a single sneeze can become a chorus if the timing is brave or careless. Vendors circulate like footnotes, improving the text. Hot pies is both advertisement and absolution. A shrug answers the unasked question about the meat's past life. Ballads arrives with tunes that have mislaid their key on purpose so that the yard will teach them back. Oranges is the church of citrus, halves raised, pressed to faces with a devotion that smells like summer arguing with fear. Someone pockets the peel for luck. Someone else pockets the coin that paid for it. On stage, a villain makes his case with the politeness of a man quoting law at a mirror. In the pit, two apprentices duel with ladles pilfered from a pie woman's barrow, a domestic tragedy in 3 thwacks and a reconciliation brought about by a third ladle supplied for symmetry. A constable nearby practices the art of not seeing things that end in laughter. He will write a report later that reads, "Peace kept," which is true and also generous. A cough starts high in the second gallery and steps carefully downward as if learning the stairs. People part as if for a lord, then close the ranks as if for a secret. Blessings are offered with a briskness that suggests efficiency rather than panic. The players cruise through the squall as mariners do, adjusting sails in their throats, trimming pauses, finding wind where there is none. Backstage, a boy with a future prince for a voice sips something stern from a tin cup and remembers his next line by humming the last one backward. By the first break, the yard is a congress of remedies. Vinegar cloths bloom from sleeves. Rosemary changes hands with the ceremony of a treaty. A talisman against bad airs is produced, admired, and purchased 3 times without ever leaving its original pocket. Numbers, those other actors, hover at the margin of thought. Bills posted this morning, bells that rang last night, the arithmetic of doors that may close tomorrow. Habit argues with fear and wins by 1 vote, helped along by a joke about lawyers that feels medicinal. The second act loosens knots. Ale becomes braver, so do elbows. A purse learns it was not safest where it swore it would be. The owner performs the ritual of patting, the liturgy of pockets, ending with a sigh that sounds like philosophy. Somewhere near the stage, a woman laughs the laugh of a person who did not know she would laugh today. 5 men turn toward it as if at a church bell. Above them, a boy in red chooses a moment to drop a line into the pit like a fisherman. A dozen hands pull it ashore and claim it as their own. Then the sky rehearses rain. 2 drops, a promise. The yard inclines half an inch. This is choreography learned over years. The groundlings pavane. The galleries extend themselves like courtesy. The play adjusts its heartbeat to the drum on the roof. A bear somewhere beyond the wall remembers its part and grumbles the bass note. The villain takes it as underscore and bows to the invisible orchestra. When it ends as days should, with hats lifted, hands that forgot to be fists, a small astonishment that so many strangers agreed for so long about where to look. The vectors unwind, laughter into stories, stories into routes, routes into rooms where supper is practicing its steam. The pit exhales, the boards cool, the flag folds itself like a careful thought. In the lane, elbows switch to evening work, carving paths toward light, toward bread, toward the rumor nailed to the door about tomorrow's show. Behind the playhouse, a new bill dries on the post, promising shipwrecks, weddings, and one fresh insult that will be old by morning. A pickpocket returns a coin to the wrong pocket and considers it a form of charity. A constable pockets a ballad and considers it evidence of culture. The boy with the tin cup hums his next part into the cool where coughs cannot follow. And the city, which has learned both arithmetic and mercy, adds 1 to the column marked laughter and lets the sum stand for the night. The order always arrived wearing long sentences and clean seals. It spoke the language of caution and bells, of humiliation and solemnity, of public good measured in closed doors and quiet streets.
It did not say the word fear. It did not have to. It traveled from chamber to chamber until it found the door with painted sun and nailed itself there, explaining, politely, that laughter, being contagious, must be quarantined. City fathers had their reasons ready like weekday coats. Crowds bring strangers, strangers bring breath. Breath brings mischief, rhyme, pickpockets, and sometimes the sort of sickness that teaches bells new duties. If a bear garden can become a sermon against cruelty, a stage can become a lecture against order. If a ballad can learn a sharper verse overnight, a rumor can grow teeth by supper. And if a jest can pry open a noble's temper with one sturdy word, what might it do to a clerk's conscience? Better to still the timbers, fold the flags, and bid the players remember that silence is also a kind of performance. The playhouses learn the choreography of closure. The flag unflown, the door made pious, the yard pretending to be a yard and not a weather vane for laughter. Actors practice disappearing into occupations with honest names: scrivener, porter, messenger, the small artifices that keep bread near teeth. Printers learn to dry new broadsides, temporarily, for the health of the city, until, and laid them out beside mourning borders and the arithmetic of last week. Alehouses pretended not to be theaters with tables. Taverns rehearsed the role of church. The city applauded the idea of calm and then coughed. When the hand behind the seal belonged to sterner seasons, men in black moods and black hats, men who believed that joy shines too bright to be safely owned, the band grew teeth. Players were to be rogues whether they wandered or not. Galleries pulled down like old pride, stages made into memory, and fines into grammar. If even kings could be taught silence by committee, certainly painted boys could be taught to fold their gowns and go home. The law has always loved a sentence that knows how to punish and instruct in the same clause. But the city has two rivers, water and rumor, and both find their way. Even when orders found posts and posts found nails, some little room found a roomier reading. A barn loaned its rafters to a romance calling itself music. A guild hall hosted a history of moralities whose morals arrived late and blushing. A private house received lessons in rhetoric at which the audience spoke only with its hands. The actors, who had learned courage by inches and breath by beats, played their parts under softer names, and the fire remembered to be careful. The Lord Mayor, for his part, counted reasons as seriously as coins. Plague travels by clamor and clatter, laughter travels by clamor and clatter. Therefore, close the places where both are plentiful. Also, theater invites sedition in silk stockings, and scandal in laughter's clothing. Also, apprentices who should be in honest quarrel with wood and iron will go to plays and learn to quarrel with sentences. Also, ale. And yet, when ambassadors needed flattering, when a queen required a halo of well-timed wit, when a victory asked for trumpets and imagery, the city rediscovered stages with suspicious speed. Bands had hinges. Players were quick learners in the school of meanwhile. They toured to towns that received them the way dry ground receives weather. They cultivated patrons whose names could argue with a seal. They trimmed scenes that annoyed the wrong eyebrows and put the eyebrow jokes back in when rumor softened. They learned to praise the city in its own accent and to promise the health of citizens in couplets. They wrote prologues like treaties and epilogues like apologies that smiled, while bending only so far as a back that knows its work. The audience practiced survival with equal art. It learned to recognize a play under a new hat. It learned to listen quickly and remember longer. It learned the patience of waiting for a door to reopen and the impudence of laughing in kitchens when doors refused. It found that even bands have intermissions, elections, festivals, weddings that require professions of joy, and that laughter returns to its form as surely as a river returns to its banks after indulging a field. Of course, there were days when the shutters had the last word, when numbers rose like a bad chorus, when bells rehearsed grief without conductor, when even rumor lowered its voice. The city performed stillness for as long as it could remember how. Theaters kept their distance like gentlemen at a funeral. Behind their doors, props slept in their season, and lines settled into silence without complaint. On such days, a masked apprentice walked past the yard and did not look in. A pie woman counted her shells and went home early. A pickpocket repented and went to church, then stole a glance at the pulpit and kept his hands to himself. Why did plays keep getting banned? Because power suspects any mirror that invites it to admire its own face honestly. Because breath, when multiplied, looks like trouble to those who count order in straight lines. Because joy is noisy and law prefers its music printed. Because stories persuade in ways edicts cannot, and persuasion in the wild makes officials tidy the forest. Because the stage can gather a city and teach it how to agree for 2 hours, and some men trust only agreement that arrives on paper. And yet, the seal's wax cools, the bell's mood lifts, the flag learns the sky again. A new proclamation flutters on the door, this time a comedy as apology, a jig as a treaty. The Lord Mayor, passing by with a retinue of reasons, hears a laugh escape the shutters like a bird and does not call for a net. Even he knows the city needs the cough that clears room for the next joke. Bands end, the appetite they tried to starve does not. Tomorrow a boy will nail up a new bill that promises shipwrecks, weddings, and a lawyer who deserves his fee. The seal will be somewhere else, counting. The stage will be here, beginning. They arrived like weather that had read a book about proper skies. Black hats, plain coats, eyes that could turn a street into a sermon by merely looking at it. Their opinions were tidier than the city and louder than the bells, though spoken softly. They were certain of two things: that the world ought to be simpler than it insisted on being, and that theaters made it complicated on purpose. To them, a playhouse was a marketplace where sins changed hands more quickly than coins. What began as a joke often ended as a wager. What began as a song often ended as a stumble. What began as a mask sometimes refused to come off. Why gather 3,000 souls under one roof for laughter when prayer took fewer and promised more? Why let a boy wear a gown and teach the crowd that boundaries were fashions? Why set careless verse to the drum of clapping hands and call that wisdom? Applause, they said, trained the body to approve what the mind would never sign. They kept ledgers of trouble as carefully as any guild. In their pages, gamblers who came for language and lingered for luck, pickpockets who learned timing from prologues, women whose wares were not pies, men whose oaths were not contracts, apprentices who left honest wood and iron for dishonest poetry and ale, Sunday afternoons surrendered to stage dust instead of sermons. Each entry added up to one conclusion: theaters were engines that burned piety and exhaled noise. The players, for their part, had opinions of the opinionated. They placed them gently on stages as zealots with names like commandments, zeal of the land, busy by nature, men who could outlaw music in a heartbeat and then hum on their way home without noticing. A clever actor could fold a whole meeting house into a single raised eyebrow. A clever playwright could tuck a Puritan into a subplot and let the audience do the rest. Laughter, when it knows itself, is a mirror with teeth. Panic made easy partnership with piety whenever the bills rose and the bells rehearsed grief. "Shut the playhouses," cried the stern. "The crowd is a disease with shoes." The argument was practical as well as moral. Breath multiplies, fever loves multiplication, therefore subtract gatherings. On these days, even those who loved a stage learned to love a quiet door. It is difficult to mock a man who is counting coffins honestly, yet Panic rarely forgot to smuggle comfort inside its sleeve. A little extra law against dancing, an extra frown for songs, a nudge to close the alehouse early for health. Applause itself bothered them. It moved like a wave and therefore looked like the sea, and they distrusted seas. It trained hands to agree with strangers, trained throats to shout without scripture, trained hearts to lift for princes who were not God. It made citizens practice unity without permission. Far safer a room where only one man spoke and everyone else practiced nodding. A clapping city is a city that remembers how to vote with noise. They argued that plays loosened lace and logic together. Cross-dressed boys, they warned, wandered near Deuteronomy. Kisses taught by laughter traveled quickly. Tragedies taught pity for the wrong kind of grief. Comedies taught contempt for the right kind of solemnity. Even the stage tricks offended them. Thunder in a barrel was a lie. Hellmouth smoke a superstition. A painted sun an insult to providence. Why should a trumpet stand in for truth? Why should a jig follow judgment? Why should a curtain decide when the world stops? And yet, the city required what they disliked. Ambassadors needed flattering. Victories needed narrating. Weddings needed allegory with gilded corners. In such hours, the stern unclenched, carefully, looking away as the carpenters raised a stage and the trumpets learned their lines. They liked their pageants when they could call them public duty and disliked them as soon as the pageant paid its bill. A conscience that can square that circle is a clever one. Not all were hypocrites. Many were severe and sincere, generous in famine, brave in plague, steady at a sickbed when the jesters had gone home. But severity, like spices, mismeasured to ruin the meal. They salted streets until nothing green dared grow there, then blamed the soil. They thought joy elite and spent their years patching ceilings, never stopping to ask whether the rain was a blessing. Theaters learned to live in the weather of their disapproval. They moved their timbers across the river where law wore looser shoes. They changed Sunday to Monday and called it compromise. They wrote prologues that bowed and still smuggled a smile. They reminded patrons with titles that laughter was loyal when treated kindly. And when the shutters came anyway, they toured until the map learned their names, then came home to nail up a bill the first morning the city remembered to miss them. As for applause, the sin they loved to name, it kept its quiet covenant with daylight. It rose when a line landed true. It faded when a moral arrived late. It forgave quickly. It forgot grudges at the jig. It taught strangers to agree about something harmless for 2 hours. In a town that argued about everything, that was near to sacrament. If the stern had ever tried it with an open hand, they might have discovered that clapping is just prayer wearing its working clothes. So when a black hat passes the door, The doorkeeper nods as to whether. Inside, the audience practices the modest heresy of joy. Outside, the city counts and cautions and carries on. Tomorrow, there may be a paper with seals. Tonight, there is a stage with boards that remember feet and a room that forgives itself by laughing. And if conscience objects, let it. The heart knows how to keep two ledgers and still come out honest. One for fear, one for mirth. The trick is to let them balance at dusk.
They arrived early, as if the flag itself were a signal book only they could read. Before the trumpet, before the pie's steam, before the first joke cleared its throat, they walked the yard as surveyors, counting elbows, testing eddies in the crowd, mapping where laughter might loosen fingers. In a city that admired skill wherever it found it, their craft was precision, the other performance silent and close, opening night twice a day. Names for them traveled by whisper and pamphlet both, foists and nips, cloyers and cut-purses, each role a step in a choreography learned in lanes and back rooms that smelled of gin and gingerbread. Apprenticeship began the way all apprenticeships begin, watching hands, copying the easy parts, practicing on sacks hung like bells from pegs. A master would clap, and the sack must not ring. When it rang, the boy learned to blush convincingly and return to practice. When it didn't, the boy learned a new word for family. A good day began with a crowd raised, as they said. A ballad seller hired for a tune that misplaced its key. A nimble soul climbing a steeple 2 streets over, heads tilted toward heaven, pockets tilted toward earth. A jig outside the yard, a brawl inside it, a rumor about a nobleman disguised among the groundlings, all devices to turn faces away and thoughts inward to where a purse sat considering its future. In such moments, a hand became a story, introduced gently, praised for tact, bowed out before it was missed. The best work happened where breath was thickest, at the stage edge, beneath the gallery's lean, in the alleys that served as lungs when laughter needed air. Elbows, those civil servants of the pit, made space and excuses both. A touch to the shoulder, "Forgive me." A touch to the sleeve, "You dropped this." A touch to the girdle, "Who am I?" The old trick with the old answer, while the Confederate completed the sentence in the purse's absence. It was comedy, drawn with fingertips and performed without applause. There was hierarchy, and like all hierarchies, it hid its rules behind smiles. A street might belong to a pair by right of custom, a doorway to a woman with a better stare than any constable's, a stairwell to a lad who could vanish upward faster than suspicion. Over them moved the quieter figures, the cloyer, who tacked success with a nod, the fence, who turned other people's mornings into coin by afternoon, the keeper of the hall where practice never ended. Disobey the map, and the city itself would seem to disapprove. A door that slammed, a hand that caught, a stage post waiting for a public lesson. Punishment had its own theater. Caught in the act inside the yard, a man might be tied to the post and left to serve as interval entertainment. He would watch the rest of the play facing the crowd, learning lines he would never speak, measuring the strange arithmetic of laughter, how it could be kind and cruel in the same breath and consider itself honest in both. Sometimes stones traveled, sometimes orange peels, sometimes only the long sentence of embarrassment, which is heavier than most fines and teaches more. Yet for every lesson, 10 successes walked home sinning. The city's great rooms, St. Paul's nave at busy hour, market lanes that thought they were rivers, the steps of Westminster,
all were stages where the same play ran: distraction, approach, release, exit. Theaters were only the matinees of that longer run. A clever rogue could empty a girdle with a kiss misapplied, or clap a lawyer's eyes while the Confederate clapped the pocket. The apology would be beautifully phrased. The loss would be discovered later and attributed to Providence or ale. Women worked a different side of the ledger, where the room was private and the customers self-incriminating. A bed is an accomplice that doesn't talk. So is shame. Men cheated of coins by their own boasting were reluctant to prosecute when the proof must be spoken out loud. Thus, justice fell often on boys with quick hands, and rarely on arrangements that required euphemism. The city liked its hypocrisy tidy. It saved gallows for those quick enough to deserve it, and spared others for being slow in a different way. In the yard, prevention was a ritual like prayer. Purses tucked inside doublets, girdle-hung bags retied and retied, a hand resting theatrically over what mattered. The call, "Look to your purses!" allegedly charitable, practically inquisitive, would sweep the pit, and 100 hands would confess their secrets at once. The warning was its own theft. Knowledge is a door, and the shout found the key. Constables knew the dance and resented its music. They favored the long hand on the shoulder, the colder "walk with me," the slow unity of a crowd turning to face a man who was suddenly singular. But even righteous pursuit thins in a maze of elbows and exits. The yard offers 100 ways to become somebody else between stage and street. A cap removed, a cloak reversed, a pie purchased and applied to the face. Presto, man into customer, customer into chorus, chorus into fog. The law wrote larger punishments than the ropes could always bear. Hang the convicted above a certain sum, beat the petty for less, mark and unmark with iron, sermonize at length, but the city's arithmetic never balanced on paper alone. Hunger teaches, craft pays, danger is a tutor that charges by the hour. Somewhere between cruelty and cleverness lives a trade that will outlast every proclamation. Theaters open and close with plague and policy. Fingers remain employed. Not all in that fraternity were villains to themselves. Some tithed to mothers who never asked, to children named for saints they did not resemble. Some left coins in a beggar's bowl larger than the lifted purse had held. Skill is a tempting god. It receives offerings in coin and conscience both, and returns a strange blessing, the belief that one is merely dancing faster than this fortune. When the flag comes down and the yard exhales, they count like everyone else. Shells that once were oysters, jests that found the pocket rather than the ear, near catches that will be told as cautionary jokes. They walk home by routes that avoid the last bells, step into light as if they had been there all evening, buy bread, vanish. The other performance ends where the street becomes a lock and the door knows only one key. Tomorrow they will arrive early again, drawn by the same magnet that pulls princes and pie women, clerks and constables, the crowd that forgets itself often enough to be generous. The stage will offer a villain with a speech about necessity. The yard will applaud in spite of itself. Somewhere between boards and boots, a hand will write its own line and leave before the curtain. The city will be lighter by a purse and heavier by a story, and who can say which weighs more?
The first vendor sings before the first trumpet. His tray is a small portable kitchen of intentions. Oysters on cracked shell, hot codlings hissing in their own sweetness, pies with lids that rise and fall like promises. Steam carries its own grammar, an imperative for the hungry, a suggestion for the cautious, a dare for the kind who eat according to weather and rumor. The street understands appetite as a kind of currency. Pay with a coin, receive a mood. Oysters are the loudest whisper. They arrive in piles that look like the river forgot to finish something important. A knife that has never been shy opens them with a prayer said sideways. A squeeze of vinegar writes punctuation where the seed neglected it. Everyone has a philosophy of oysters, and all of them are right for at least an hour. Best in months with an R, best when the knife is clean, best when the seller eats one first, best when the priest walks by quickly. The shells collect like pale applause around boots that prefer good news. Ale stands where morality can find it. It is breakfast in a careful cup and supper in a longer one. Sermon and silence depending on who holds it. The head remembers the shape of a day. The second cup insists on a plot twist. A tap room attached to a playhouse is a marriage that requires no bands. Bread meets breath, laughter meets reason and promises to return it later. A man can declare a treaty with his neighbor in ale and break it in water. This is not science, but it has charts. Questionable heat is the true playwright of the street. Fire does what it can with what it's given. Sausages that claim to have had noble relatives, eels that practice gymnastics before retiring to sauce, onions that apologize for nothing. A pan remembers everything. It forgives what it can. Pies are edited until they are correct, which is to say, hot enough to suggest theology. Fritters pretend to be golden coins and convince at least one child every hour. If a thing can be roasted, it will be. If it cannot, it will be argued with. Regret is sold in portions. The first is a mouthful that was definitely too hot. The second is a pie that was definitely older than its lid. The third is an ale that teaches the feet to make new plans. A man who is eaten badly always blames philosophy. Street heat is a vice. Oysters are a lottery. Pie is revenge. A woman who is eaten well never explains. She licks a thumb, raises a brow at the river, and moves on. The city keeps score and lies about the numbers. Vendors are Congress and chorus. The oyster woman does not suffer fools or priests with the wrong tone. The pie man swears the meat had a respectable name and a trade. The man with roasted apples has perfect timing. He appears exactly when a good line requires sweetness. The water bearer considers himself a physician and is not entirely wrong on days when ale's advice is too generous. They jostle like saints in a small chapel and forgive each other by shouting. Theaters and trays borrow each other's crowds. A joke drifts from the stage, lands on an oyster shell, and becomes seasoned differently. A heckle is born over a pan and grows up into a line in next week's play. A boy buying a hot codling learns to hold two things at once, a fruit and a future speech. A pickpocket selects between a purse with vinegar on it and a purse with ale. He chooses neither and takes the one with grease because grease is honesty. Street caution is its own cuisine. Those who know bring knives as if they were opinions. They test a seller by asking where from and listening for verbs. The wise buy heat they can watch being argued into food. The truly wise buy cold and improve it with salt and arrogance at home. Everyone pretends to understand seasons. Everyone has a cousin who once ate an oyster in June and remembered it all winter. Inside the playhouse, the air learns its lines. Outside, the air writes them. An orange half becomes a talisman against bad airs and a garnish for cynicism. Ale becomes an argument with punctuation. Pie becomes a vote for optimism. A vendor's cry cuts through a soliloquy and improves it by accident. Between acts, the yard becomes a market that has read a little poetry and forgives grammar for the sake of pleasure. By dusk, the street has fed everyone who asked politely and several who did not. Shells pile up like pale moons along the gutter. The last apples dream in their jackets. The pans cool and think about tomorrow's onions. The ale stops preaching and begins reminiscing. Regret ties its napkin and promises to be kinder in the morning. It will not, but hope is always a condiment. If one were to write a theology from street heat, it would be brief. Blessed are the quick knives, for they shall reveal the sea. Blessed are the hot pies that argue and then agree. Blessed is ale taken in good company, and bread that stands beside it. Blessed is caution without fear, and appetite without apology. And blessed are the hands that work in steam and shout for a living. They keep a city fed, when speeches only keep it still. The play bell rings again, which is to say the street exhales and becomes audience. Vendors lean on shutters and taste the air for jokes they will sell back later in new wrappers. A woman counts shells, wraps for coins, and ties the knot that will defend tonight's sleep. Somewhere, an oyster shell remembers a line about the world being something one opens. The knife remembers it faster. The flag unflutters, the trays go home. Hunger, happily tired, is now a listener.
The day's music begins before the trumpet. A vendor's cry, like a bright ribbon pulled through fog, a cartwheel lamenting its long career, a door's hinge negotiating with weather. Then the throat clearing starts. Not sickness, not yet, but the city's way of tuning itself. A single cough by the gate, answered by another near the pie woman's barrow, echoed by a ladder somewhere behind the tiring house. London inhales. The playhouse lifts its flag. The orchestra, unpaid, ubiquitous, finds its key. Hawkers are the wind instruments of this street symphony. Hot pies in a confident alto, oranges like small bells, ballads with a hopeful tenor that pretends the tune will be remembered and forgives you when it isn't. They drift in the margins of law, those footmen of necessity, licensed by appetite and disputed by guilds, selling where need is quickest and rent is reasonable. Under arches, on bridges, in taproom doorways, along the ribs of the yard. Their trays flash like cymbals, their patter is percussion. They know every corner's acoustics and which overseer looks away at kindness o'clock. Between the cries, a background section keeps time, the tap-tap of a stagekeeper's hammer mending a stubborn tread, the hush thump of canvas discovering its shape as a forest or chamber, the shy scrape of a prop sword learning not to embarrass itself, the shoemaker's last convincing a prince to walk as if born doing it. Backstage is all soft cues and swallowed laughter, a row of throats humming their first notes into steadiness. Someone oils the trap with a prayer. Someone else sneezes into a sleeve and calls it weather. The audience arrives in movements. First the early birds, with elbows that know the front rail by touch alone. Their coughs are polite, rehearsed. Then the apprentices, louder, carrying the day's dust in their lungs and looking to trade it for a better story. After them a clot of clerks who clear their throats on the offbeat, as if they were footnoting the air. The galleries add a thin mist of discreet hems and a chorus of ahems that believe themselves invisible. The pit answers with the democratic hack that says, "We are here, and we are many, and some of us breakfasted on ale." Hawkers thread the passages between breaths. They time a cry to the actor's pause and turn it into music. Water slides under a line like underscoring. Pippins lands exactly when virtue is tempted,
and a dozen teeth make the same small, decisive sound. Nuts scatters like applause for the understudy the crowd doesn't know is saving the scene. A good seller can float a tray through the densest yard solely by the current of coughs, each cleared throat opening a lane as if in gratitude. Stage business learns the vernacular of interruption. A cough in the galleries becomes a herald. The actor crowns it with a glance, and the house laughs, cured. A hawker's cry overlaps the villain's speech. The villain buys an orange mid-threat and peels it like a soul. And now the scene has found a new kind of danger. A sneeze declares itself king. The fool bows and begs a boon of a handkerchief, and courtly manners are restored by comedy. This is the diplomacy of boards and lungs. Nothing wasted, everything folded in. Hackers, the kind who persuade locks, not letters, work their craft to the same rhythm. The rising murmur masks the inquiry. Your pardon, sir. The laugh crests and a ribbon unties itself. A throaty cheer at the jig's first step becomes cover for a girdle's small betrayal. If you wish to see their choreography, listen with the eyes. When coughs fall out of sync with jokes, somewhere a hand is voting on a purse's future. Outside the yard, the throat clearing continues as civic habit. In the alehouse, a barkeep coughs to mark the end of the story that's about to begin again. His audience answers with the priestly chorus of men who don't believe the punchline, but want to. By the bridge, a waterman hawks his own voice, oars, bright as brass, while a fishwife saws the air into saleable portions. A constable practices the cough that means, don't, and the one that means, not now. Every trade keeps 2 or 3 versions, polite, official, friendly, and chooses by weather and conscience. Backstage, the business grows more delicate. A boy's throat refuses a high note. The company tunes down and hides the key change under a laugh. A stagekeeper coughs thrice for ready at the trap, twice for late entrance, once for God help us. The prompter keeps a little cough for when a king forgets himself. It is shaped like his name. A shared mug circulates with civility's strictest rules. Wipe, sip, bless, return. Superstitions collect on the rim like varnish. Hawkers feud and reconcile at decibels the city finds charming. The pie man accuses the nut seller of stealing his moment. They schedule an argument for after the jig and sell more in their quarrel than they could have in peace. The water boy negotiates a treaty with the tap room, a thumb of ale for a bucket of honesty. Territory is drawn with voices on air, erased by the next tune. A poor man learns he may sing hot apples anywhere a woman is laughing. A rich man learns that silence buys nothing but suspicion. Coughs carry news as well as air. A new ragged sound begins 3 lanes over and migrates. Hawkers trade looks, fold oranges like small suns under the nose, and price fear into their patter. Players shorten pauses, lengthen exits. The gallery cough adopts a prayerful timbre. Someone opens vinegar, and the yard agrees to believe in it. The city has always spoken diagnosis with its throat. The stage has always answered with tact. When the cloud bank arrives, the sudden hiss of rain on the yard, the stamp of feet turning the floor into a drum, the soundtrack thickens. Hawkers lift their trays like shields. The pit settles into the ancient choreography of tilt left, tilt right. A thunder roll in a barrel says, "We meant it," and the house applauds the weather for taking direction. Coughs become laughter, become clapping. The change is seamless, like a costume that fits 3 actors in one act. After the jig, the orchestra packs itself away. Hawkers sell the last notes. Oranges, whispered now, as if to pockets that only awake in twilight. The pie man counts his lids like coins and prays the arithmetic was honest. The water boy drinks his own sermon and decides he is better than wine tonight. The prompter puts his coughs back in his pocket. The stagekeeper oils the hinge where storms are kept. The audience leaves their breath behind for the dust to keep until morning. And then late, when the watch has coughed the hour and the river has cleared its throat for fog, the stage breathes alone. Boards creak at their joints like old jokes remembering how to be new. A stray orange peel dries into punctuation. A dropped handkerchief waits under a bench to become tomorrow's plot device. In the alley, a hawker tries a new cry on the darkness, hears it come back true, and smiles. The city settles its chest. The soundtrack rests between movements. Tomorrow, the same symphony will tune up. Vendors testing key, boards testing courage. The throat clearing that says, "We are many, and we'll be kind if you are." You will know where to stand by the music. You always have. And if a cough interrupts, the stage will name it, friend, foil, cue, and carry on, as London does, setting time by the human metronome of breath shared and forgiven.
The map explains it without speaking. One bank writes laws with a ruler, the other edits them with a thumb. North of the river, the city keeps accounts in conscience in straight columns. South, in the liberties, places with old monastic loopholes and new municipal patience, the streets keep their own minutes. Their entertainment is not an afternoon, it is infrastructure. The wind carries two different sermons, one about order, the other about appetite, and the bridge is the punctuation between them. Bankside wakes like a fair that forgot to stop. Their baiting pits yawn open like bad ideas with good attendance. Gaming dens practice arithmetic with dice that learn to act. Stews, the houses with towels on their vocabulary, air beds and grievances. Between them, playhouses lift their flags as if signaling ships. Comedy, tragedy, news from abroad spelled in trumpets. It is an entertainment ghetto if you ask a magistrate, a campus if you ask an actor, a pantry if you ask the public. Everyone is right and not finished. Why here? Because liberty first. The liberty of the clink, the old clerical pocket where bishops once kept their rules and then misplaced them, remains expertly misruled. Because ferries second. Watermen run their oars like a transit authority that accepts laughter for fare. A penny carries a groundling faster than any argument. Because the city prefers its scruples within its walls and its pleasures where it can point, over there, said with clean hands and a dirty smile. And because rents on complicity are always lower where law wears looser shoes. Crossing is a ritual. The bridge collects feet and intentions. The river edits them into arrival. Apprentices march in squads that claim they are only looking. Lawyers practice not noticing anyone they know. Gentlemen come in cloaks that remember last night, finish their blushes halfway across, and step ashore as if innocence had always been this side. Women cross in groups of three, one to want, one to warn, one to write the account later with footnotes. Watermen shout oars into the wind, and into the playbills, and into the century. Their cry is older than most sermons, and more persuasive. Southwark itself is a grammar. Streets conjugate leisure, to play, to shout, to bet, to kiss, to sell, to watch. Vendor cries make a liturgy that shares worshippers with the stage. The cathedral, St. Saviour's to its parish, Southwark to history, rings a time that includes both prayer and pie. Actors marry there, bury there, baptize children who will someday spill ale backstage while someone says hush, hush, then grow up into lines. The parish registers hold more drama than a season's repertory. They remember names after the playbills forget them. Playhouses bloom along Park Street like good arguments that learned geometry. The Rose puts its back to Maiden Lane and faces Appetite. The Swan raises its timber circle like a challenge to the city's straight lines. The Globe gathers weather and words in a yard that smells of oranges and opinions. When it burns, as things do on afternoons that begin in triumph and end in buckets, it is rebuilt with the stubbornness of people who have learned the river's lesson. Movement is not loss. The Hope tries to be both stage and bear pit and discovers that compromise is a comedy only from a distance. Everything that thrives here negotiates with frowners.
Aldermen to the north send letters long enough to be small fences. The south answers with trumpets, which are more comfortable than paragraphs. Now and then a sheriff crosses to scold. He returned for the ballot he pretends he confiscated. Then closures come. Bankside grows quiet in the tone of a cat considering obedience, then begins to purr again the hour a seal sleeps. The Liberties have a talent for surviving orders by outlasting moods. Money explains what morals don't. L pays choruses. Choruses pay carpenters. Carpenters pay rent. Rent pays for a magistrate's cousin to look the other way. Ferries count more passengers when flags fly. Inns sell more stew when tragedies weep. Their baitings fill on days when sermons are too successful. A city is a stomach with a parliament attached. The South feeds the North stories and returns the bones with sauce. There is also the matter of permission and its cousin, forgiveness. North of the river, you must ask. South, you must apologize, which is faster. An actor on Bankside manages 3 professions before dinner: citizen, artist, and negotiator. A printer near the stews can sell a sermon in the morning and a sonnet in the afternoon and be rebuked by both buyers in the evening. A constable learns to say "not now" in 3 dialects and is promoted for it. South of the river makes room for the untidy, a boy in a gown who is not a woman and is nonetheless persuasive, a gentleman in tears who is not bereaved and is nonetheless consoled, a villain who keeps an appointment and is nonetheless applauded. The stage teaches a city to hold more than one truth at once. Bankside gives it the laboratory. The bridge itself is a play. Enter the anxious. Exit the satisfied. Enter the stern. Exit the softened. Enter the honest. Exit the experimented. Exit the robbed. Enter the wiser. Stalls line the parapets selling whatever the river dreamt last night. Fresh eels, old news, new ballads with familiar tunes. The water below says the same thing in every century. I carry everything, I judge nothing. Even the crimes are honest here. A pickpocket will tell you doctrine. North, you steal a purse. South, a purse volunteers. A bawd will produce an accounts book with admirable penmanship and dismaying margins. She pays her tithes more promptly than some aldermen. A bare ward will explain husbandry as if addressing a college. Hypocrisy is imported. Local sins keep their boots on. When night gathers, the North closes its shutters like eyes. The South flares its tavern lamps like intentions. The bridge becomes a rosary of latecomers, fingering excuses. A bell in the parish says home, and means it. A trumpet on a stage says once more, and means it. Bankside eats the last of the oysters and prepares the morning's shells. The river puts its blankets on in strips. Why was the fun always across the bridge? Because geography is policy. Because law prefers to watch its exceptions from across water. Because ferrymen needed fares, and actors needed verbs, and vendors needed heat, and a city needs a place where it can confess its desire to be less perfect. Because liberty is not only a charter, it is a habit. Because the North wanted to be good, and the South wanted to be alive, and each learned a little from the other on the way home. In the morning, the city will polish its ledgers. The Liberties will polish their pewter. The bridge will count feet, as if preparing an argument. Flags will climb ropes like prayers that learn to joke. And London, divided wisely by a river that knows more about people than every will ever will proceed by its old compromise. Think north, feel south, cross often.
The flag does not fly, and the yard feels suddenly larger, as if absence were a kind of weather. A constable reads the order again for the benefit of the door. The door listens politely and stays shut. Numbers have decided to be stern. Bells have practiced sorrow. Gossip has rehearsed caution. And so the actors do what actors have always done when stillness is the only audience. They change scenes by changing towns. Touring is not escape. It is survival with scenery.
Boots learn the arithmetic of miles. Scripts learn to fold small enough to share a satchel with bread. The company becomes a caravan of intentions, a cart with costumes that remember better days, a chest with coins that don't, a boy whose voice has decided to be a man in the middle of a speech, a dog that is not officially in the cast and always finds its light. The roads are lines on a map and sentences in mud. Both are edited by weather. They play wherever a roof has manners, inns whose galleries make honest galleries for once, guild halls that smell of wood and verdicts, barns with beams that ring truer than most promises. In some towns, the mayor applauds first to teach the town how. In others, a clerk coughs on the prayer word and the audience turns its laughter down by one candle. A page tacked to a post, this night only, is a bill, a wish, and a dare. Silence arrives at the first line and decides whether to stay. Patronage is the passport that never expires so long as it is shown often. A name over a door, Hunsdon, Pembroke, Derby, turns vagabond into servant, turns illegal into requested, turns actors into hours. The livery is a costume that convinces constables. A seal on a paper is a quiet prologue in a sheriff's ear. In exchange, the troupe lends its breath to power, a compliment in blank verse that hangs in a noble's hall like tapestry, a mask that teaches rank to dance without tripping, a pageant that assures a town its betters are also beautiful. Winter is the true censor. Roads become long arguments that cannot be won. Fingers learn to act through gloves. Ink develops a stammer. The breath, visible in rehearsal, becomes a prop that does not take direction. An innkeeper saves a corner near the hearth for the gentleman with boxes, and stewed tastes better than literature ever could. Jokes are trimmed to fit rooms and wind. Tragedies wear cloaks and are forgiven for it. The audience moves closer not only to hear but to warm the story by hand. Some nights are triumphs in places that did not know they were hungry. A tinker wipes his eyes and calls it smoke. A midwife quotes a prince at a birth. A reeve misquotes a fool at a wedding and improves the line for local use. Coins land with the sound of consent. On other nights, the room offers only its patience and the house cat, which steals the scene with no training at all. The clap at the end is the same in either case, the human noise that says, "We made a shape together." Letters travel the opposite way along the same roads, thin as winter. They bring news of London's temper, a reopening rumored, a new law sighed over, a patron promoted, a rival's play praised beyond reason. The troupe places the letters under a tankard to keep them from blowing away and reads them aloud. Each rumor a small fire that burns differently in each chest. If the word says home, Boots begin to measure distance as hope rather than hardship. Even under roofs and names, touring keeps its careful disguises. One actor is always also quartermaster, lawyer, nurse. The leading man counts the takings with the same care he gives to My Kingdom. The clown learns to mend wheels and pauses. The boy who plays women learns 3 ways to tie 3 kinds of knots and uses them all in a week. When spring is late, the company sells 2 swords and buys a mule and calls it art. Patronage can be love or law. Some lords know their players by name and grief and send shirts when shirts are needed more than speeches. Others send only the right to wear the right color and expect brilliance on demand. Court can be a warm theater with gold for footlights and a cold corridor where you wait to be dismissed forever. The trick is to bow with conviction and keep your own prologue hidden in your pocket, dry as a match. The long winter is not only weather. It is the season when a craft remembers itself. Old speeches are recut for smaller rooms. New scenes are stolen from the way a reeve scratches his ear, the way a barmaid declines an insult, the way a parish stares together at the first snow and pretends not to. Plays learn to travel as folk tales do. Shortcut here, digression there, a joke in the dialect of this week's roof. When London wants them back, they are better than when it sent them away. And then the letter arrives that is not rumor, a seal cracked with a fingernail in the stable light, a sentence that begins, "It is permitted," and ends with a date. The company reads it twice, once with lips, once with lungs. Routes reverse, deaths promise to behave. An innkeeper is owed a performance upon return, which means next winter, which means always. Boots forget the arithmetic of mud and remember the scansion of home. Back across the bridge, the flag climbs like a prayer, and the yard fills as if absence had been a good advertisement. The boards feel younger under old feet. The first laugh is a kind of pardon. The first hiss belongs to tradition and is cherished. The troupe has traded miles for timing, cold for ceremony, loneliness for the particular crowd that understands them without footnotes. Touring has taught them to aim lines through wind. Now London's weather is only weather, and the trumpet needs no translation.
The week begins on a table. A clerk in a narrow room copies numbers into neat sorrow, parish by parish, dead by cause, as best as anyone can guess when doors are shut and neighbors are shy. He sharpens the quill as if grief required a cleaner point. By noon, the bills of mortality are out in the world, paper wings carrying arithmetic into kitchens, churchyards, and yards that prefer their sums spoken by trumpets. Hands take them with the reverence saved for bread and the superstition saved for weather. 30 is a rumor, 31 is law. Somewhere between those two integers, the city's breath changes shape. Playhouse doors feel the draft that precedes a seal. A flag declines to climb. Actors read the paper as if it were a part and discover they are not in this scene. Ill-house talk adopts a priestly whisper. Even lies speak softly. Theaters have learned the Bill's grammar. More than 30 means silence, less means hope, and exactly 30 means a day for bargaining disguised as devotion. Bells speak the second language of counting. Parish by parish, they tell the day what it has lost. Each knell a coin dropped into time's open hand. Some bells are modest and some overfond of themselves, but together they write a skyline of sorrow that the wind edits kindly. The city learns to tell stories by listening. This quarter is troubled, that lane is steady. The river remembers. The playhouse listens too and adjusts its dust to the key of the week. Bodies explain what numbers cannot. Doors chalked and posted, windows that practice not looking. Carts whose wheels have learned to roll softly. A watcher sits outside a house like a comma, holding the sentence of quarantine in place. Inside, the air is a careful animal. Vinegar makes an altar of every cloth. Rosemary is promoted beyond its talents. Orange peels become a family of small sons waiting to be worshipped. Outside, neighbors perform the old liturgy of leaving bread and pretending not to wait for thanks. Rumor wakes earlier than paper and travels farther than bells. It says the plague rides fleas like a lord, or travels on breath like a sermon, or hides in damp like a tenant who will not pay. It swears that tap rooms are tender, that laughter draws sickness as easily as moths draw punishment, that a certain parish has learned the trick of living forever and will sell it dear. It adds a neighbor's name to the list of angels one day and removes it the next. It is a bad chorister with a good ear, and it teaches the city to hum fear until fear sounds like prudence. The Privy Council writes in a hand that does not smudge. Orders step across bridges with a constable's gait, bidding the stages darken, and the crowds unlearn themselves. Players vanish into roads and barns, trading applause for roofs,
and discovering that tragedy can be acted with a cloak for a crown if the room is warm. Those who stay find smaller stages, closets, courtyards, courtesies, and new forms. A scene recited like prayer, a speech read aloud like soup, a joke told 2 rooms apart and still arriving hot. Apothecaries, once the punchline, become gravity. Their shops smell of hope and pepper. Receipts are written like spells. Jars line up like patient jurors. One recommends theriac with the solemnity of a treaty. Another swears by tobacco as if smoke could hire itself as sheriff. A third sells pomanders threaded like rosaries for noses that have run out of psalms. Everyone knows someone who drank a cure and lived, which proves little and purchases much. The bills grow margins in the mouths of men. 30 becomes nearly 30, which is a synonym for open. 31 becomes only just, which is a synonym for argue. 28 becomes safe, which is a synonym for forget. Theaters pinch their days between numbers, open on a Thursday that appears innocent in morning light and becomes guilty by Saturday. The jig, when permitted, sounds like amnesty. The audience coughs carefully and calls it weather. The actors bow with the humility of men who know arithmetic can end any sentence. Bells change key with the season. Summer is a rash of sound. Winter ominously quiet or unnaturally busy, both portents. A long silence means mercy or discretion. The city votes for mercy and pours it like ale. On certain afternoons, the bells and carts and papers agree so exactly that even rumor nods and goes to bed early. On others, a single bell rings too often and the street crosses itself as if it had hands. Bodies are counted, but not accounted for. The bills list totals. Kitchens list names. A whole parish becomes a rumor about God. A sexton develops the shoulders of Atlas. Grave diggers swap jokes too loudly because the ground does not like crying. They are not cruel, only employed. The playhouse painters come by and leave the gateposts newly white, as if cleanliness were a talisman. It is not, but everyone agrees to pretend until pretending works. When doors close, art practices patience. Closet drama is invented again in rooms where a prince is played by a chair and a queen by a shawl, and nobody complains because it is lovely and because the soup is ready. Poets learn to write with doors shut, which is a different tense. Some take in work from patrons who pay in silence and venison. Some take in washing and call it metaphor. Musicians learn the weight of quiet. Audiences remember the shape of longing and become better at it. Then the curve bends. A week comes with a number that looks like mercy. The next one brings its brother. Bells discover moderation. The bills are still read, but no longer allowed. Rumor forgets its lines and asks the town for a prompt. The town replies, soon. The door with the painted sun is still shut, but has begun to breathe like someone waking. The boy with the paste pot cleans an old notice and waits for the new one. The flag has dreams of height. Reopening is a rehearsal for resurrection. A letter arrives carrying permission like wine in a careful jug. The stage sweeps itself twice. A jig practices smiling without guilt. A prologue is written that bows to arithmetic and thanks the council with heroic couplets and looks, briefly, like prayer. The audience arrives wearing citrus and caution. It laughs 2 measures late and is forgiven. The first cough is applauded for honesty. The second learns timing and is also applauded. For 2 hours, bodies are not counted but counted on, and the bills, folded in sleeves, agree to wait. London will do this again because it knows no other way. Count, close, gossip, grieve, write, wait, open, gasp. Bills are the city's diary, bells its breath, bodies its meaning. Between the 3, rumor scribbles marginalia and the theater copies it into roles. When numbers grow, doors learn sternness. When numbers fall, hands remember how to clap. Every closure teaches an entrance. Every bell that tolls becomes a metronome for the next jig. And the paper that breaks hearts on Mondays is used by Friday to wrap the oranges that sweeten the yard.
Backstage, medicine has a call time. It arrives before the trumpet, in jars and pockets, and the stern voices of people who love other people loudly enough to fuss. A cloth steeped in vinegar is folded like a prayer and tucked into a sleeve. A pomander, orange bristling with clove, sways on a ribbon against the ribs like a second pulse. Someone opens a tin of something that smells of rosemary, sage, and courage, and the room agrees to believe in it until further notice. These are not cures. They are companions that know when to keep quiet. The property man keeps an apothecary in a paint pot, theriac that looks like treacle and tastes like a lecture, a powder that promises to persuade breath to behave, a sprig of rue taped to the inside of the prompt book where only anxiety can read it. Boys are told to sip vinegar and think of clean rivers. Men are told to sleep and do not. A cough is renamed weather. A sneeze is granted the dignity of dust. The mug, passed with ceremony, wipe, sip, bless, return, collects superstitions on its rim like varnish. On stage, oranges learn double duty. Halved in the hand like tame sons, they visit noses in the galleries with the authority of ritual. Their scent argues with air and often wins the first sentence, if not the paragraph. Vinegar cloths flowered discreetly from cuffs. Gestures adjust to accommodate them. An actor peels a fruit mid-speech, and the house sighs. Some for the line, some for the peel, some because both smell like memory. Remedies work best when they are also theater. Belief is an instrument the stage can tune. In the tiring house, remedies sit beside laces and wigs. An onion is sliced and placed on the sill to bribe the air into honesty. Smoke is summoned in polite amounts to clear the room of what it cannot see. A line is trimmed to avoid a gasp on the third beat, and 3 lives are saved by the fiction. A live chicken is not applied to anything because the company has standards, but someone tells the story anyway for luck, and the bird in the yard preens with undeserved pride. Outside, apothecaries sell receipts written like spells. 4 Thieves vinegar is bought with coin and shared with neighbors. It smells of clove and storytelling. Tobacco is praised by men who enjoy smoke regardless of its opinions. A paste that once kept queens awake now keeps stagehands optimistic. It is spread on bread and called prudence. Bloodletting is discussed in rooms with barber poles and decided against by actors with shows to play. They choose instead to let laughter do the lighter work of balance. Wishful thinking is cataloged and carefully issued. The bad airs are frightened by citrus. Rosemary remembers on our behalf. Clove closes the door where breath might wander. Juniper smoke instructs corners to improve. Ale, in moderation, is a tutor. Ale otherwise is a sermon that forgets its text. These are song-like prologues and believed as far as tenderness permits. No one is fooled. Everyone is comforted. Comfort is medicine that knows its place and performs it nobly. Hygiene develops stagecraft. Costumes are brushed within an inch of memory. Collars are boiled into obedience. A comb is shared with the gravity of a relic. Gloves are considered not merely elegant, but ethical. A handkerchief, once a flirtation, becomes theology. The boy who plays the queen is wrapped in caution and citrus. The man who plays the king is wrapped in peppermint and lies about sleeping. The fool tucks a pomander into his cap and becomes a doctor without a license. In the yard, prevention rehearses. Look to your purses becomes look to your noses. Oranges bless strangers by proximity. Vinegar cloths approve doorways and doubt corners. A vendor invents curative pies and sells them at a price that insists on their virtue. A ballad about a miraculous receipt is sung to the tune of a familiar sin, and by nightfall it is sold 3 jars and a new superstition. Remedies move like props through hands that know how to tell stories with them. There are bolder receipts whispered at curtain, hot wine with pepper to provoke a sweat, garlic under the pillow to instruct the lungs, rue chewed until language improves, a posy tucked where breath becomes speech. A player pulls at a clove as if it were a line to be remembered.
another palms camphor as if it were an entrance. They are not fools. They are professionals who know that half their work is faith and the other half is pretending well enough to help faith along. When numbers climb and bells learn grief by rote, the inventory expands. Doors are chalked. A red mark teaches knees to bend and carry bread. Pest houses are invoked in quiet voices. Friends remain friends from the other side of doors. The stage packs its remedies into boxes: citrus, cloth, courage, and the traveling prayer. In barns and guild halls, the same orange glows under new rafters. The same vinegar stains a new sleeve. Wishful thinking adjusts its accent and is welcomed. Do any of these things work? The city can count, and it counts little victory where it finds it. Quarantine and distance do their cold, clean work. The rest keep hands steady. A plague cannot cure a fever, but it can teach a room to breathe together when it is safe and to hold its breath when it is kind. Vinegar does little to the air and much to the mind. Oranges do little to sickness and more to the courage that meets it. Wishful thinking is unscientific and indispensable. It keeps love from panicking. When the doors open again, remedies remain as customs. Oranges still travel through galleries on ribbons of gossip. Vinegar cloths still wait in sleeves for other kinds of weather. A sprig of rosemary, once pressed to lips against bad airs, is now pressed to the brow of a boy on his first entrance. Backstage, the property man keeps his paint pot apothecary for tradition. Front of house, a vendor sells comforts without promising cures, and everyone buys one, because comfort is what people are for. In the evenings, when the stage is dark and the rooms learn to be only rooms, the objects that tried to help are put to bed. Cloths folded, oranges wrapped, jars stoppered, smoke let out into the night like a song that knows when to end. The city lies down with its receipts and wakes with its reasons. Between the two, theater keeps the habit of care in stock. Vinegar for sleeves, citrus for breath, and wishful thinking, fresh daily, for whatever arithmetic brings in the morning.
The permission arrives folded like a held breath. It is read twice, once with the lips and once with the lungs. And then the room moves as if a spring had been nudged. The flag, asleep so long it learned to dream of weather, shakes itself out and remembers height. The door, stern by habit, tries on hospitality and finds it still fits. A broom acquires the manners of a priest. Dust, that old understudy, takes its bow and leaves quietly. Everything is ordinary in the sacred way. Boards creak where they used to. The rail at the pit is still carved with initials that pretend not to be love. The trumpet tests a note and startles the pigeons into applause. A boy, taller, puts on the same gown and is surprised to find it shorter. A man, thinner, counts the steps from tiring house to light as if there might be fewer, and finding the number holds, forgives arithmetic for other crimes. They rehearse remembering. The prologue is written to behave itself, gratitude folded into meter, civility dressed as couplets, a modest genuflection to health and office and patience that pretends not to be impatient. Jokes are sanded smooth where they might snag on new skin. Old cues shake hands with new caution. The jig keeps time with a softer heel. A stage manager coughs into his sleeve and calls it dust on principle. The audience arrives in two kinds of silence. The first is reverent, like a church that just remembered a hymn it loves. The second is careful, the hush of people who know how numbers behave and are willing to be kinder than mathematics for 2 hours. Oranges ride in like small suns. Vinegar hides in cuffs as if modesty made it potent. A cry of pippins floats under the eaves and breaks no law. Look to your purses sounds almost fond, like an old enemy welcomed back for tradition's sake.
The first laugh is late and then perfect. A line lands, plain, good, not even the cleverest of the night, and the room chooses to rise to it together, as if selecting a hill to defend. It is a laugh with edges smoothed by gratitude, a laugh that carries the names of those not here without making them heavy. Hats lift on cue, hands clap the way friends do after an illness, not too hard and not too soft, exactly enough to say, "We see you, and we are here." And yet, absence is everywhere, honest as breath. The groundling who heckled in perfect scansion is gone. His corner is quieter and kinder to actors who don't need practice. The woman who loved villains sits elsewhere, or never will again. A new pair of eyes tries out her old delight and finds it fits. The vendor who sang "water" like a bell has been replaced by a boy who is trying to learn the pitch. The street teaches quickly, but not instantly. Among the players, a cloak hangs waiting for a man who never learned to take his bow small. His friend ties the clasp anyway and goes on. Backstage, they set aside a chair no one sits in and do not mention it. A line that used to belong to a voice now belongs to the room. The room keeps it safe. Someone misses a cue by a heartbeat, and all the heartbeats forgive him at once. A hand passing a prop lingers a second longer than custom. The object receives the weight as a blessing and becomes lighter. Everything is different except the important part. The shape of attention remains, a room that agrees about where to look, a crowd that knows how to become one animal when kindness is required and many when laughter is needed. The ritual of entrance, hat, step, breath, returns like a bird to a rebuilt rafter. The ritual of exit, clap, smile, rumor, follows with its old politeness and one new promise. Tomorrow again, if tomorrow consents. They count without seeming to, who is back and who not, who coughs politely and who not yet, whose laugh has lost its upper notes and found a sweeter lower one. Coins ring in a box in a way that knows both relief and hunger. At the tap, 2 cups touch like a treaty signed with warmth. "How was it?" someone asks in the alley. "Good," comes the answer that means more than its small word. "Enough," says another, which is a kind of prayer. Outside, bells practice a tune that is neither dread nor denial, but daily life with room for both. A watchman sings the hour with the voice of a man who has seen too many and intends to see more. The river looks at the lights along Bankside and decides to carry them gently until morning. The bridge counts feet like beads and forgives everyone crossing. A gull writes the rude word it always writes and is forgiven. Tradition matters. Who didn't come back? The city refuses to answer in a list. It points instead to a bench that learned to be a shrine without being asked, to a doorway whose lintel has been touched more often than necessary, to a vendor's cry that has acquired an echo that doesn't belong to walls. Names belong to kitchens and ledgers and the soft side of night. The theater keeps their shapes by doing what they liked best, making a room breathe together. When the jig bows, the applause is longer than usual and then stops sooner than grief wants. People stand not because anyone is noble, but because legs have remembered how to show respect. The company bows as if it understood that gratitude is a thing one wears on purpose. the door opens onto a street that has waited well and intends to continue. After, in the tiring house, they fold the day like linen, smoothing what can be smoothed and leaving the rest as it is. Vinegar cloths are put away with the delicate politeness reserved for old superstitions that still earn their keep. Oranges are counted with secular reverence. The prologue is tucked into a drawer with a note, "Keep for when needed," which is always. A boy, out of gown and into tomorrow, tries the first line of the next new play under his breath and does not break. Curtain up. Again. Not as it was, not as it should be, but as it can be. A room that contains what happened and what may, and finds a way to stand between them without lying. The first laugh after silence is never loudest. It is truest. And in the space that laugh makes, the city takes a breath it thought it had forgotten and gives it to the stage to keep until morning.
The flag has learned to sleep. The trumpet has put its voice away. The boards breathe like old friends after a long night. What remains is the kind of quiet that keeps its promise. A bill folded in a pocket, a lamp turned low for late arrivals, a ribboned orange saved for tomorrow's nerves. If this wandering through London's footlights left a little warmth in the sleeves, leave a gentle cue before the house goes dark, tap-like, the modest applause that keeps the doors oiled. Let the bell keep the calendar, so the next curtain rises while the city is still tying its shoes. Subscribe and walk the bridge back with us, from alley to yard, from trumpet to jig. One last favor before the stagehands douse the sconces. Write the time zone in the hour this kept company. For example, CEST 2023. It draws a constellation of galleries and kitchens and train windows, proof that a room can be shared by strangers who never met and still agree when to laugh. Add a line about the weather where the story found it. Such notes sweeten the house for the next audience. Until next time, keep a handkerchief handy and a kindness nearer. Keep citrus for courage and vinegar for respect. Let rumor be smaller than reason and laughter a little larger than fear. May morning find the flag ready to climb, the door remembering welcome, the river rehearsing light, and the first voice of the day choosing a good line. When the bell suggests another chapter, come as the city does, work still on the cuffs, errands still in the shoes. There will be a place at the rail, a scene that knows your name, and breath enough for the simple, durable invitation that outlives closures and cares. Stand, look, laugh while it's warm.